introduce myself, and then Abby, I'm going to lend it over to you. But I'm Nadine. I'm an astrologer. Julie explained it perfectly well, so I don't think I need to go into huge detail about my background. But yeah, I used to be a graphic designer. I was very interested in astrology as a practice, and then as the universe would have it, I ended up being able to do this as a profession. My goal for you guys tonight is just to explain how astrology works, because there are a lot of misconceptions and a lot of ideas that people have about it that aren't necessarily true. One of the lenses in which I'd love for you guys to approach this session is sort of discovering your own personality through astrology, because we all know ourselves, we to a certain extent understand ourselves, but it's really nice to have some type of spiritual practice echo back to us things that we already know. So yeah, just like Julie explained, I think it'd be awesome if you guys could pull up your birth charts. I can see in the chat some of you guys already know yours. So I actually would recommend chatting to each other, putting your sun, moon, and rising so other people can see that. You can begin to see your similarities with your friends if they're in this meeting, and so on and so forth. But I think, Abby, you should take it away.
This is so much fun. So first of all, thank you, everybody. First of all, can you hear me? Like, give me a wave or, okay, you're good. This is like the best night of the year to be up all night doing this kind of learning and exploring and growing. And so thank you to everybody for staying the night and for joining and creating community. We might be separated in our own homes in the sheltering in place, but this is really magical. And I'm so grateful to all of you for joining, and to Nadine and to Julie for putting the session together. What a fun topic that we get to explore astrology, and like astrology on Shavuot. So I'm going to start with a show of hands. I better put myself in a gallery view. Show of hands. How many here think Judaism says astrology is permitted? Raise your hand if you think. I'm going to like scroll through. Like, Anne's like kacha kacha. I don't know. And some people don't have your things on. But all right, so like some hands. And now, how many hands down? How many here think Judaism says that astrology works? Like, permitted or not? Like, is it right? Is it a way of telling the future? Is it a way of learning something about our personality or our lives? So like, show of hands if you think it's like real. Like fewer hands. Okay, good. Hands down. So what's wild is, let me see. Oh, Julie, can I share a screen? Can we get my screen sharing privileges?
Yeah, you should be able to share your screen. You're a co-host.
Awesome. Now I got to find the right one. Let's see if it's this one. Yeah. Can you all see this image? Is there an image on your screen? Is it working? No, no image. Sharing is paused. Hold on. We're going to do that again. Sorry, everybody. Let's try it this way. There we go. Now can you see it? Someone raise a thumb or a hand or a wing. Yeah, okay, good. So, some of you may have had the privilege of seeing this. Yes, some nods. This is the floor of a synagogue, a floor of the synagogue from the 6th century in Israel. And it's the zodiac sign, right? So clearly, Jews at one point were into it, right? And now I'm going to share 2 texts. These are both from the Talmud. So the first one here, Talmud in Masechet Shabbat, an astrologer predicted of a newborn male infant that he was destined to become a thief, for which reason the mother always kept the head of the child covered, like with a kippah, in order that the fear of heaven be upon him, and admonished him constantly to pray for divine grace. In spite of it all, one day the kippah fell from his head upon one occasion, after he had grown to manhood and attained to the dignity of a teacher of Torah, and he fulfilled the sinister prediction by plucking and devouring the fruit of a tree which did not belong to him. Okay, so not only are there astrologers here, they're right. Okay, I bring you one more, and from Talmud again, from Brachot. Another teacher of the law, they're talking up and back. So one teacher of the law declined the preferred position of head of the school because a Chaldean, those of you who remember Genesis, like Abraham comes from the Ur of the Chaldees, right? It's like the country next door, because a Chaldean had predicted that he should occupy the chair for only 2 years. And this proved true when he finally accepted the position 22 years later. In other words, you can try and run from your fate, but actually it's going to catch up to you. And the point about the Chaldean is interesting, because actually it's understood that in this earliest period, the Jews in Judea weren't so into astrology, but that the Chaldeans nearby did. So in those earliest references to Jewish practices, it's mostly like it was in the culture around, but Jews don't do it. By the time we get to the Roman period, which is when the Talmud is written, we're seeing there's astrology there. And there's references in many places in the Talmud to astrology and to astrologers. So-and-so consulted an astrologer, and this is what happened. Parables about God is like an astrologer. Israel is like an astrologer. Israel is like one who consults an astrologer. It's clearly part of the culture. By the time we're fast forwarding, because the layout for tonight is I'm going to speak just for like 4 more minutes and then over to Nadine to play in a deeper way. And then in the Q&A, we can come back to either Nadine's taking us through our charts and helping us understand astrology in, like now in 2020, or we can go back to sort of the Jewish lens, spiritual side of it, either way, or either spiritual side of it. So here we are in the Roman period and in the Talmud. It's there. It's clearly part of the culture. Fast forwarding into the Middle Ages, it's everywhere. Everyone is doing it. Astrology is a widespread, respected part of the culture. It's a skill, it's an art, but it's also a science. And the Jews are doing it too. In fact, by the 8th or 9th century, in Europe and in that whole eastern part of the world, the Jews were the foremost masters of astrology. And so there are texts from the Muslim universe coming, they're being translated into Hebrew, into Spanish by Jewish translators, Jewish astrologists. They were big in the scene. And some of the major texts that come out of this period, major Jewish texts, take it seriously. The Zohar takes astrology seriously. The Kabbalah takes astrology seriously. Sefer Yetzirah. So these major works, and even some of the biblical commentators who are still printed on the page. When you look at a Mikra Gedolot, a biblical commentary, Ibn Ezra, who's writing in like the 12th century in Spain, he's completely into it. He says it's a sublime science, he calls it. And he refers to it throughout his biblical commentary. There's references to astrology throughout. The only one who opposes it, Maimonides. Maimonides thinks it's bunk, and he actually thinks it borders on idolatry. He connects it to a verse in Leviticus 19:26, for those who are into their Tanakh, which says, do not practice divination. And he connects that to the practice of astrology and says, that's what this is about. Like, stop it. Stop. It's idolatry. Don't consult the stars. Don't consult the planets. It's divination. It's idolatry. We're not supposed to do it. But he's the lone voice, and it doesn't take. So that all through the Middle Ages, up and through the 17th century, it's rife and part of Jewish literature and texts and culture. What finally kills it is modern science. So modern science abolishes astrology kind of from like the science standpoint for everybody in the culture, the Jews included, because we're pretty, good at science and into science. And so like that's maybe the other myth in a technical sense that we're going to uphold instead of astrology, figure out how to hold that with our theology, except for one phrase. And I'm trying to decide, I'm looking at the clock, whether I want to share my screen or not. Yeah, I'm going to do it. Let me get it up. Share screen, go back. Okay, so this is also from the Talmud, in Moed Katan. Rava and Rav Chisda, all these people in this, they're rabbis. Rava says, life, children, and sustenance do not depend on one's merit. Rather, the merit depends on mazel. For Rabba and Rav Chisda, two of their friends, were both righteous rabbis. One would pray for rain and rain would fall, and the other would pray for rain and the rain would fall. Meaning they were both so righteous that God would listen and answer their prayers and give them rain. Rav Chisda lived to the age of 92, but Rabba only lived to the age of 40. Rav Chisda's household celebrated 60 weddings, Rabba's household 60 funerals. Rav Chisda's household fed their dogs fine flour. Like even the dogs had amazing food to eat. And there was more than enough. Rabba's household fed simple barley flour, the grungiest, cheapest, least expensive thing, to people, and not enough could be found. So we all know that this is true in life. We can't figure out why would God be good to this one and bad to that one? They're both good people. So Rava comes and says, certain things depend on mazel. And that's the only remnant, mazel. The mazalim, it means stars. So when we say MazelTov to somebody, it's the only remnant that's still in our culture and like the post-science revolution world. That's this remnant, MazelTov. May the stars be aligned. May the stars be good for you. That's really what that phrase means when we get it from the Talmud, and it still lingers with us. So I'm going to stop on the Jewish side of things. I'm going to turn it over to Nadine, and then when we get to Q&A, I'm so happy to answer anything or to go deeper, or Nadine, you and I can go back and forth.
That was so awesome. When Julie originally reached out to me, I had the same question. I was like, am I allowed to do this? I mean, I would love to, but I didn't know that these worlds could merge. So it's super, super awesome to hear that. I'm going to share my presentation. Could some of you just nod to confirm if you can see? Cool. All right, so Astrology 101 is what we're going to cover tonight. I want to be able to see myself. Hold on one second. All right, cool. So what is astrology? So basically, there's this phrase in astrology that says, as above is below. And it's this concept of what's happening in the sky is potentially impacting us in our personalities and also the events that are happening in our lives. There's many different ways to practice astrology. So Vedic astrology, for instance, Eastern astrology is very set on the idea that we can predict actual events in our lives. Whereas Western astrology, which I practice, is much more about the emotional undercurrents that the planets are, how they're impacting us on a personal level. So if you read, let's say, if you go to the back of Cosmopolitan magazine, you'll get a horoscope for your sun sign. And for the most part, they might resonate with you or they might not resonate with you. And today, and that's why I think astrology gets a really bad reputation, as people say it's overgeneralized or it doesn't resonate with me, or how could you possibly write 12 horoscopes for the entire population? That doesn't make sense. And what I will say is that was a path towards making astrology massively popular, but it's definitely not the path towards having people understand astrology. So being able to do talks like this really is the best part of my job, to begin to explain to people the nuances of what astrology actually is. So anyways, so my parents are chemistry professors. So I thought it was funny that Abby brought up science. This isn't a science, and I won't try and pretend or sell you guys on the fact that it is. I will tell you the parts that are scientific, and I'll tell you the parts that are not. So the part that is scientific is that we are studying the planets and exactly where they are in the sky right now. So that part is astronomy, basically. So, where is the sun, where is Venus, where's Mars, where's Chiron, where's all these different celestial bodies. And where astrology comes in, the part that's a spiritual practice, in my opinion, that's what I would call it. People could call it many different things, is that it's human interpretation of what the planets meant. So, many years ago, people came up with descriptions of what the sun was, what Venus was, what all the signs and the constellations meant, and how it impacted people's personalities. And so that, me coming from a very academic family, I can't fight anyone on. However, in my experience, I've done probably 2,000 readings so far in my career. It's an uncanny way of understanding ourselves, and the connections that you can create and like the epiphanies that you can have through studying your own birth chart, I think make the study worthwhile. And to me, make any of my lingering questions of how does this work, I can make peace with that because I've gotten so many positive things out of this. For that reason, this is why astrology is not a religion, is it's not requiring anything of you. It's also not implying anything. It's rather just saying, here's some information, just like taking a personality test would be. So that's sort of like my blanket beginner answer to like, what is astrology? But I could go into that for hours, but that's not what we're going to do today. All right, so this thing is going to look crazy. This is a birth chart. I actually pulled up the exact chart of what's happening in the sky right now for tonight because I thought that'd be kind of exciting to look at together. This, when I first started studying astrology, looked like nonsense. I mean, I was told this is a 2D map of a 3D sky, and I looked at it and I saw a circle and I saw a bunch of different shapes, and I thought to myself, like, I don't see the sky. I don't know what people are talking about. But to help you guys begin to see that, right here between Leo and this thing called ASC was the horizon line. So at this moment, right above the sky, we can see Saturn and we can see Jupiter and we can see Pluto. And then when I pulled this up, the moon was setting on the western horizon in New York. And then below the horizon would it be Mars, Neptune, Chiron, Uranus, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, and then all these different other things are points in the sky. They're not planets. And so you can kind of begin interpreting a chart there. This is how the planets are showing up in the public. So let's say a baby was born today at 1 a.m. in New York, New York. This would be their birth chart. And it would tell a story of, okay, this is how they show up in their career. This is how they show up in their groups and belonging, because these are public houses. So how the sky is broken up. And these are the planets that are below the horizon. So what is the baby going to be like when it's communicating? What it's going to be like with its family? How is it going to relate to its mother and to its father? So astrology has this really interesting way of letting human beings be very complex, because who I am in my career might be very different than who I am with my family, and that might be very different than who I am as a partner. And all of those things can and should coexist simultaneously. One of the things that astrology lends itself really well to is therapeutic practices. So in astrology, you could learn, okay, wow, I have this huge desire to be in the public, and yet at the same time, I'm very private and reserved with my family. How can those two things compete with one another? And that's where working with a therapist could be really awesome to figure out what that path forward might look like, or a life coach, or whatever person that you really trust and feel can move your life forward. Astrology, to me, just gives you this interesting blueprint for all of your potential. There are different ways to interpret a chart. Like I said, depending on the practice that you have, it could be very literal. So like I was describing with Vedic astrology, it could say this person is destined to be a doctor and they're destined to get married at X age. And in my belief system, I think we're leaving out the human quality, and then we're also leaving out the magic that life has. And there are certain things that I believe we cannot predict. And that's how I like to use my practice. Is if I were to see a client, I would never tell them for certain you should do X, Y, or Z. I would say, here's an opportunity for your chart, take it or leave it. So exactly like we would in our personalities, a teacher says to us when we're very young, oh my gosh, you're such a good writer. You would be a really fantastic poet. And we may never fulfill that potential, and that's okay. That was the course that we chose to take life. So I think one of the misconceptions around astrology is this idea of self-will. And I think we leave that out sometimes in astrology. What's the difference between what's fated for us and potentially our hand in that fate? And I think it's a combination of both things. But I absolutely believe everyone should have their own interpretation of the deeper meaning of life and how our life unfolds, etc. So, all right. What is the birth chart? Basically, this is a blueprint or a thumbprint of the planets at the exact moment that you were born. So it's a really beautiful thing to do, to pull up your own, because I like to think of it as like your own beautiful little thumbprint that no one else can have exactly the same as you. And so even if you look at twins, let's say, if they were born a few minutes apart, then the rising sign might have changed, or even the moon sign might have changed. And then identical twins, what's really interesting about that is, yes, their birth chart is going to be exactly the same, but then potentially how transits, which are like horoscopes, impact them differently, meaning that their life course takes a different path. So again, that's why I think it's interesting to say that there's a little bit of human will that we're leaving out in the concept of what astrology is. So yeah, now I'd love for you guys to begin to forget a little bit about, oh God, okay, so I need to think about what all these planets mean, and rather start thinking about this as a personality test or a personality descriptor or something like that. That's how I got into astrology. Is I was not interested in studying planetary bodies. I got interested in understanding myself. So that's what we're going to do tonight. All right. So what we're going to learn today, I'm going to cover 5 personal planets. So Sun, Moon, Rising, Venus, and Mars. I also will throw in Jupiter and Saturn, but I'm going to do that very quickly because they're not super personal. And then I am going to go into all 12 signs, because if you're listening to this and you're like, well, I don't know my birth chart, and so this is a useless thing for me, at least knowing about the signs I think is really important, and being able to kind of dismiss some of the overgeneralizations that people make about certain signs will be nice to do. And just to, at least for your sun sign, which is just based on the day that you were born, you can find some identification in that. I'm going to do intermittent Q&A at the end of the personal planet section, and then at the end of the 12 sign section. Also, it's very strange giving a presentation on Zoom because it's hard to get feedback from people, but I will keep rolling. So yeah, Julie said this at the beginning, but if you missed it, you can pull up your chart on any free site. She put one in the chat box, which is fantastic, but you can use astrocharts.com. Everything is free. It's pretty easy to pull up. You'll need to know your date of birth, including the year, city and state of the hospital you were born in, so not where you were raised, but specifically the location you were born. And then lastly, the time that you were born, ideally down to the minute, but it's okay if you have kind of a 30-minute window. Not everyone has an accurate birth time. In fact, some people don't have a birth time at all, and you can still know certain things about your chart without the exact time. All right, the planets. So 5 personal planets. What we mean by personal in astrology is they're the 5 planets that are very specific to your personality. So the sun sign, the moon sign, Mercury, Venus, and Mars is based on the day and the time that you were born. Whereas if you begin moving a bit more outwardly, like Jupiter and Saturn, those move on a slower basis, meaning that anyone born the same year as you is the same one. So they're no longer personal. They're more generational than anything else. I could give an entire talk on why baby boomers are a thing, why millennials are a thing. We can't blame each other. We can potentially think about the planets that are at work there. First up, the sun sign. This is a thing that Western astrology is built off of. You're hard pressed to find someone who doesn't know what their zodiac sign is. So you walk into a bar, you walk into an event, and someone comes up to you and says a cheesy line like, hey, what's your sign? You would say, in my case, Aquarius, or whatever day you were born. The sun sign is very important, but as you guys are going to discover today, it's not the only factor at play here. So I've had many clients say that they hated astrology because they did not identify with their sun sign, and they hated all the cliches that came with it, and they felt like it was really pigeonholing them. So this is where we're going to launch from, but where there's many more parts to the chart to unpack that explain the nuances of why me being an Aquarius is very different than someone else being an Aquarius. So the sun in astrology would call the giver of life. So it creates energy. It's sort of this very bright, invisible part of the sky. So for anyone's birth chart, it describes sort of like your general ego not being a negative, but ego rather being, how do I identify as an individual on a public level? It's a good indicator of the purpose of your chart. So if you have any lingering questions around like, what do I do for my career? Or even more personal, like, how do I make the most of my life? The sun sign's a really good indicator of what you could be functionally doing in the world. I'll go into the signs later, but I'll give some examples. A Leo, no matter what trade they're in, no matter what profession they're in, would be really talented at public speaking, or they'd be really good at being some type of leader. Even if it's leading a team of 2, it's still Leo traits. A counter example would be Scorpio. Scorpio is the sign of introspection. It's the sign of being able to understand our deeper wounds and our deeper, the parts of ourselves that maybe we would only talk about in a therapy session is actually very Scorpio. And so their purpose might look an awful lot like understanding themselves. They might spend an entire lifetime just wanting to understand their emotional inner workings. And then maybe last example is to be a sun in Aries. Aries is the sign of initiation, of being the entrepreneur, of being the starter. And so potentially your purpose is around creating something. So do something that no one's done before is a very Aries type life plan. Other things that are important to say about, in case it's all curious to you guys, is that this has a ton to do with your relationship with your father. Even if you had an absent father, or you never had a relationship with your dad, or even if you had a difficult relationship with your dad, the sun sign still encompasses that relationship. The reason why this makes sense in astrology is that we were in the womb for 9 months with mom. So we were like getting super cozy with her. We had all this energy flowing between her and us. And then all of a sudden we come out into the world and there's dad in theory. And we're like, oh my God, there are different people in the world than just me and mom. So I need to have a sense of self, because no longer am I able to exist in this very immersive world of just mom and I. So the sun is a good indicator of sort of how you objectively viewed your dad, and then potentially also the ways in which you've adopted some of his characteristics, and even in certain people's cases, the ways in which you've rebelled against your father. So the ways in which you said, I'm nothing like my dad and I'm going to be my own individual. And then if you do, probably later in life, you realize you guys share a ton in common. So last thing that I'll say about this is it's your conscious desires, meaning it's very rare to have a client say, no, I don't at all identify with my sun sign. Maybe on some level they do, because it basically describes sort of what's going to make us feel happy on a daily basis. What are the ways in which I want to execute my life? So to counter that, the moon. The moon in astrology is basically our secret self. So if the sun sign is our public persona and our conscious identity, and even in some terms our ego, what about our ego-less self? What about us if no one else in the world existed? What if we didn't care what anyone else thought? The moon sign, in many ways, I think to me as an astrologer, is almost more fascinating than the sun sign, because I wouldn't know that about you unless I was 5 or 10 years into a friendship with you, or if I was in a relationship with you of some kind. The moon sign doesn't show up on a public level necessarily. It's a good indicator of how you need to nurture yourself. So the sun sign is how you nurture your ego. So you're like, I'm successful, I'm moving forward, I'm doing all these activities. The moon sign is like, what happens when you go home at the end of the day and you're tired and you're depleted and something went wrong in your day on a conscious level? How do you take care of yourself at the end of the day is the moon sign. And again, I'll go into the signs later. But what I want you guys to know is everyone has a different way of nurturing themselves, especially if you yourself are a parent. I'm sure you've seen that in your children's personalities of, okay, one of my kids needs autonomy, and that's how they feel nurtured, is they just want me to trust them and they just want me to let them do their thing. And then I have this other child who really actually needs to be physically held, and they love the intimacy that comes from that. So I think what astrology has taught me is that there's no one size fits all. One spiritual guru may be good for one person, but it might not be good for another person, because the way that they nurture themselves is very different. I would also say it's a hidden part of yourself. We live, in theory, in a culture and in a society that tells us to operate from our sun sign, meaning we have to be, successful in some way, shape, or form. We have to be moving forward. The moon sign is actually a really underrated part of the chart, I would say. It's a part that we ignore all the time. So if you ever had any friends, or it's a big cliche, but this idea of like a midlife crisis, I wouldn't be surprised if those people are not nurturing their moon sign. They're so in their ego, they're so in their sun sign that they've completely ignored the heart in the nurturing part of their chart, which is the moon sign. What I will say is the moon moves really quickly. And so this is why having an accurate birth time is necessary. For the sun sign, you just need to know the day that you were born. The moon moves so quickly that it's good to know exactly what time you were born. I'm going to check the chat just to make sure if there's anything. Okay, cool. And then since we brought up the father, this is a good indicator of your relationship with your mother. So now I'm going to give some examples of moon signs. Not everyone had a relationship with their mom that was cozy. In an ideal world, the moon would be in Cancer, because Cancer is ruled by the moon. So those people potentially had a really nurturing relationship with their mom. And I mean nurturing around like the topics that we think of around nurturing. So it's a warm energy, it's inviting, it's kind, it's also receptive. They listen really well. They can take care of you in all these emotional ways. But others of us grew up with different moms. And so an example being moon in Capricorn means that the mom was very diligent, and she was also probably structured and had really good boundaries, but also had very high expectations. So the way that manifests as an adult is that that's the way that you nurture yourself. You nurture yourself by having high standards, you nurture yourself by having structure in your life, and you nurture yourself by having some type of bounding box around your day. And then as a counterexample, moon in Taurus is very cozy. So that's someone who says, when I am at home at the end of a long day, I cook an amazing meal and I put on my favorite pajamas and I call it a day, because all I need to do is just feel cozy and safe within myself. So I wanted to give those polarizing examples because, again, not one size fits everyone's idea of what it means to be nurtured. All right. The ascendant, the rising sign. So this is now suddenly becoming one of the most popular parts of astrology, and I'm really happy about that. The rising sign explains why you show up the way that you do in public. So I want you guys to kind of sit back and think about your best friend in the entire world. And if you don't have a best friend, maybe think about a family member or just whoever is the closest person to you in your life. And I want you to think about how they operate when they're with you. And so they're comfortable, they know you, they're totally themselves. And then I want you to think about how they are when they meet someone for the first time. That's the rising sign at play. Some of us are really shy when we meet people for the first time. Others of us are really stoic and seem almost rude, and we don't mean to be. Others of us are extremely people-pleasing when we first meet someone, myself included. Others of us are very introspective, and so we are reading the person really well, but they're not necessarily able to read us. So that's what I would call an introvert. But again, astrology believes it's very much a spectrum. And then we have Leo risings, for example, which says their first impression is to be as loud as possible. Loud doesn't mean necessarily sound. I mean, they dress loudly, they hold themselves very confidently, and they're forced to be reckoned with upon first impression. So I think the ascendant sign in astrology is the perfect place for understanding why two Sun and Aries show up totally different than each other, because their rising sign is dictating how they present themselves in the public. This can explain sort of why in a job interview you get along with some people way better than others. Rising signs are the things that really kind of explain chemistry upon meeting someone for the first time. So sometimes we hit it off with someone upon first impression, and then we have those other friends where we absolutely couldn't stand them at first, and then for some reason we kept getting to know each other, and then we realized that we were so compatible. The sun and the moon have more to do with long-term compatibility. The rising sign has a lot more to do with immediate compatibility. Do we understand each other? Can we speak the same language? Are we on the same page? So on and so forth. I jokingly call it the head of PR. So if you think of like the chart as a company, the sun sign is the purpose of the company. The moon sign is like the internal, the team and the culture. Do they like each other? Are they happy? Are they getting good benefits? Do they feel, understood? And do they feel respected? And then the rising sign is the head of PR of the company, because it says, all right, we need to go out in the world. We need branding. We need to make sure that people understand our message, and we need to make sure that we're presenting in a way that feels right to us. And so it dressed you this morning, your rising sign, it got you out of bed. It gets you first dates, second dates, first job interviews, second job interviews. Pretty much everything to do with why you show up in the world the way that you do is dictated by your rising sign. So again, this idea that the sun sign is so massively popular in astrology, I'm so glad that's changing, because the rising sign, I think, was the missing piece into people like really relating to their birth chart. All right, cool. So yes, I think I covered that. Then I will say this definitely is dictated by the time that you were born. So it would be ideal to have your birth certificate. But again, not everyone has that luxury. So this is a one piece where you can work with an astrologer to figure out your rising sign. You can kind of do like a reverse programming where they pull up all the potential rising signs you could have, and you guys talk about your life story and your general personality, and they can help you pinpoint a rising sign. Is that accurate? Is that a like perfect way to do it? No, but it is possible. There's what's called resurrection astrologers, where they help you resurrect your birth chart. All right, Mercury. This begs the question, all right, I show up in the world one way, and then my sun is my purpose, and my moon is how I am on an internal level. Mercury begs the question of, but what am I curious about? What am I interested in? And also, what am I intellectually motivated by? It's the messenger. It's, again, messenger of the gods was Mercury. So it's this idea in astrology of we all communicate in different ways. It doesn't mean one person's better or worse at it. It just means we have different styles of talking and explaining ourselves. And also, this makes me get really curious about public school systems, and actually really any school system for that matter, because again, not one size fits all. As a individual is not necessarily underachieving. They might just not have the right environment for their Mercury sign, because some of us are very empathetic learners, meaning much more interested in kind of feelings and feeling emotionally connected to something. Others of us are really quick and we're really fast, and we excelled at school. And then others of us needed a more interactive program. We needed to learn by doing. We couldn't just sit in a desk and be happy with that. So Mercury is a really good indicator of why we function intellectually in a certain way. If I were to do a reading with a client, this could be a piece of the puzzle to their vocation. So like it's not everything, but it could tell me about, oh, you actually could really like X, Y, or Z field, just throwing that out you in case it's at all curious to you. And sometimes it's beautiful in a chart reading. I'll say to someone, you're really creative because your Mercury is in Pisces. And I was like, have you ever considered, creative writing or poetry? And they say, oh my God, when I was younger, I really, really wanted to, but it was such a pipe dream that I ended up giving up on it. So I think, uncovering hidden gifts that we have in the chart is a really amazing part of astrology. I'm going to check.
Forget it's Abby. I'm just going to give you a time. We have 15 minutes left for the session.
Oh no. All right. I think we're not going to be able to go over the signs. So I'm just going to finish the planets and then we'll go into Q&A. All right. So Venus, this is actually, I'll skip Venus. I'm going to skip Venus. I'm just going to do sun, moon, rising, and then I'm going to go through the sun signs really quickly. So the 3 fire signs, my goal for this piece is just to debunk any myths that you guys might have around what each sign means. I'm going to start with Aries. Aries is the first of the, okay, so what fire signs have in common is action, starting things, and being the leader of some kind. Aries is going to be the first of the zodiac. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. If you're the first, it means no one else has come before you. So that's why in the most cliche way, they're the entrepreneurs, they're the Fortune 500 CEOs, they're the startup founders. That's a very Aries quality. It's, I want to do something ahead of my time. But also Aries can just be leaders in their household, or they can be leaders in their group of friends. They can be leaders in different capacities of their life. I think that's good for Aries. Leo is also a starter because it's a fire sign, but it's about self-expression and it's about being visible and it's about creativity. So it's different than Aries because Aries is not necessarily creative, even though it can be. Leo is about being bold and being a visible representation of some type of human nature. So whether it be a display of our emotional qualities or a display of our creative qualities, all of those are Leo traits. So it has to be visible in some way, shape, or form. And then the last fire is Sagittarius. Sagittarius is the most relaxed version of a fire sign. And Sagittarius is much more interested in using life as a way to activate wisdom. So it's really interested in travel for that reason. You'll hear a lot of like very cliched ideas around like they are, travel bugs, they never sit still. It's for the sake of life being an adventure and life being an experience. So Sagittarians have a wisdom to them because they've lived a lot. They've done a lot of different things. 3 earth signs: Capricorn, Taurus, Virgo. What Earth is going to have in common is, of course, you could infer or imply, is just grounded. It's going to want to be here quite literally down on Earth with tangible things. And, it wants to be able to have some sort of bounding box around ideas or their life. So Capricorn is the starter of the earth signs. So it's really great at management for that reason. It's really good also just at being a leader, but in an earthy way. So this idea of like, okay, I create very clear expectations for either my employees or my partners or my family or et cetera, et cetera. So Capricorn's really, really good at achieving things for that reason because it's really good at being a starter, but in this very down to earth and tangible way. Taurus is the most luxurious of the earth signs, but it's also the most earthy of the earth signs because it's a fixed sign, meaning it's a little bit stubborn on its worst day. But on its best day, it's reliable, it's loyal, it's completely rooted in the here and now. It loves nature as much as it loves food, as much as it loves luxury. And then lastly, Virgo. Virgo is the most intellectual of the earth signs. So Virgo is ruled by Mercury, which is the messenger of the gods. So it's very interested in tangible facts, data, learning, but they can be super creative. I think that's one of the cliches that really bothers me is when people say Virgos are boring or Virgos are very kind of like pigeonholed in this way. Virgo is so intelligent, it can really pick up any skill or any trait or any concept and learn it pretty much overnight. So if you have a prominent part of your chart, sun, moon, rising in Virgo, I'd love for you to consider the ways in which you are very intellectually prone and the ways in which you could be a great messenger of some kind, whether you be a teacher or be in marketing of some kind, could be very Virgo. All right, 3 air signs: Libra, Aquarius, and Gemini. So air qualities are just going to be the communicators. So it's flexible, but it's also really able to use its words to communicate something with the world. But all 3 of these signs do it in a different way. Libra is the balance keeper of astrology. So it's basically it's the justice seeker as much as it's the peacekeeper, as much as it's the mediator. I think is another, I can't tell you how many lawyers I've done readings for who have tons of Libra placements in their chart. It's basically able to figure out the other side of the coin. It's able to understand the other person's perspective before they've even told them their perspective. So it's a really, really good mediator. So that's what it's good around communicating with, is like, how do we find the middle ground here? Aquarius, on the other hand, is rebellious. It's the innovator. It's really known for being pretty much 100 years in the future in its ideas and its concepts. So it's a really good communicator around out-of-the-box ideas. So Aquarians rarely are understood very well by people, but that's because they think in such an innovative and strange way. And the last one is Gemini, the most flexible of the air signs, and they're already pretty flexible to begin with. Gemini, just like Virgo, such a sign of communication because it's ruled by Mercury. But I would say Gemini differentiates itself by Virgo because it wants to be expressing itself. So, another fun fact is all of the most famous rappers in the world are Geminis, and that's uncanny, all of them. Or at least the ones that I find noteworthy. So maybe you guys can disagree with me, but Gemini is basically this ability to find words for really big concepts. So just things that the average person would not be able to explain. Gemini has this really unique way of putting it into a way that makes sense universally. Lastly is the 3 water signs. What water is going to have in common is empathy. That can be a blessing and a curse, right? So it's a part of our chart. If you, let's say, have sun, moon, rising in a water sign, this is a part of you that is hypersensitive and needs to be protected emotionally. Cancer is going to be the most maternal of this empathy of the water signs. It's really protective. And so it's guarded as much as it's able to take care of someone. So it's nurturing, but at the same time, it's not going to be an open book to just anyone. So it's not necessarily the most trusting of the water signs. Neither is Scorpio. Scorpio is a psychologist, in my opinion, of the zodiac. It's really good at understanding human nature, but unlike Cancer or Pisces, it doesn't necessarily just see the best in people. It also really visibly feels the worst in others. And what I mean by that is it can feel their demons, it can feel their anger, it can feel the parts of us that we repress. And so they're very empathic when it comes to understanding the things that are being said. And then the last one is Pisces. Pisces is the most artistic and the most flexible of the water signs. So I would say it is able to understand anyone because it's the last of the zodiac. So we always say it has all other 11 signs within it. And so it can really connect with pretty much anyone. The only downside to having Pisces in your chart is a lack of boundaries, because in order to have empathy for others, in theory, we have to put ourselves in their shoes, or we even have to go into their space. And that's not necessarily protecting yourself depending on who the person is and who you're interacting with. So I unfortunately did not plan the timing of this super well. I thought I'd get through way more in an hour, but I think I open up to questions, but again, questions for Abby as well, if you guys have questions about what she covered.
Nadine, do you want to take off the share screen and then we can see people as well as we talk? So this was great. There's a lot of questions in the chat, and I'm wondering the best way to do it. It seems like a lot of the questions I've been skimming as you're reading are particular just to certain people, and I'm trying to see if there's like themes as I'm skimming through. Do you want to take a minute to skim? I also, there was questions earlier on as you started that I had a chance to read while you were speaking, so I could start from there as well, but it's up to you.
I'm going to pick out some good ones I think could
Great.
be, I hope, to many people.
Go for it. Yeah, because we only have time for maybe 1 or 2, so go for it.
Linda, what does it mean if your sun and rising are the same? That essentially means kind of what you see is what you get. So it's this feeling in someone of, okay, what I got from them in the first 30 seconds of meeting them feels very similar to how I now know them 6 months later. So I find there's a good congruency when someone's rising sign is the same as their sun sign. Really what it says, going back to the company analogy, is your head of PR is on the exact same page with the CEO of the company. So they're just totally attuned with one another. The way that they present themselves is exactly the same as how they feel on a conscious level. What does it mean, Rachel? What does it mean if you're a triple or quadruple of the same sign? That's what's called a stellium in astrology. It's a cluster of planets in the sky at the moment that you were born. So you could, like, let's say the example is Jupiter, the sun, and Mercury and Venus were all together in one sign at the moment that you were born. I want you to imagine those planets almost hugging each other in the sky. So what that means inside your personality is, again, tons of congruency. All of those planets and the themes that they operate in our lives were on the same page. Upside to that is that you can make decisions pretty easily. The downside to that is you can be very sort of single-minded about things. The way I want, it's my way, and I have a really clear idea of what I want, and no one's going to change my mind. I have a stellium, and I can speak from experience that it's a blessing and a curse. Do I have time for one more? Okay, I can't hear.
Yes. Sorry, yes. Why don't you do one more brief, and then I'll close with something from the Jewish stuff that came up.
Okay. Trying to find a good one.
They're all good. She's trying to find one that applies to the most people.
Yeah.
How about
that? Ooh, someone asked about compatibility. I'm not going to read the exact question, but I think in general, the general point of the question is sort of like, how does compatibility work in astrology? This is like a huge topic that I think is really important to say. there is no such thing as being compatible or incompatible with someone on paper in astrology. So what I do with clients who, let's say, are coming in for a relationship reading is I'd rather tell them this is maybe what you're misunderstanding in your partner. You can make it work with someone who on paper is totally incompatible with you, meaning there's a lot of conflict in the two parts of your chart. But it really begs the question of, what do you want out of a relationship? Do you want it to be easy breezy, or do you want it to help you grow and help you expand as a person, even though it's been really hard? So I guess it begs the question of, is relationships a place of learning for you, or are they a place of peace and harmony for you? So I always tell people, don't Google compatibility, because you'll hear some horrific things about you and your amazing partner, and you shouldn't take those things too seriously in astrology. So I think I'll end there.
I wish we had 2 more hours. This is so great. There was earlier the chat, there was questions about like mazel and changing your luck and bad luck and good luck. And so that felt like a useful place to bring us back to as we close. And as you were talking, Nadine, I loved what you said at the beginning, which was that we could treat this not as a science, but almost like a personality test. And I thought that was a really helpful frame for those of us who are trying to figure out how to hold astrology and our Jewish practices or Jewish faith and theology together, because it opens it up, it opens it up and allows us to plug it into how we walk through our life. Like if it's just another tool, and I want to say fun, like in a lightweight way, like maybe it makes it a little less heavy to approach it that way. And then my mind went with this question in the thread about changing our mazel. Can you change your luck if you have bad luck, if you have good luck? And some of us know the superstitions, like, my grandfather changed his parents changed his name because he was such a sickly baby, right? And if they changed his name, then his luck would change. And it worked for like 30 years. And then, so, and then we could decide whether his luck really changed or not when he died very young as an adult, so we have like these pieces in our culture around changing luck, changing names, mishanem mazal, mishanem makom, mishanem makom, mishanem mazal, like change your place, change your luck, all those expressions. And I found myself thinking in our final minutes about what we do on Yom Kippur when we stand and we say the Unatana Tokef, right? And we say like our fate is sealed, who shall live, who shall die. It's the same kind of thinking, how we approach the idea of fate and destiny, and is it written in the stars? Is God in charge? How does this all work? And what at this point in my life, how I approach all of it is really that we may not be able to choose what happens to us, but what happens inside of us is what we can change, right? So I can change my response to something. It may be terrible that I'm stuck inside with COVID, or that people around me have died, right? But like whatever's happening on the outside doesn't determine how I walk through it on the inside. And that's where our agency and our choice comes through. And so on that, maybe it's 154. So on that, I'll say that's maybe how we can hold astrology as part of our Jewish lives, right? That it's another tool that maybe can help us understand ourselves, make choices about how we want to walk through the world and approach the things, whether it's science or art. Maybe it's just something that can help us in our lives understand ourselves and one another a little bit better.